Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to direct a question to Mr. Rob. In California, we've seen a rash of devastating wildfires, and this year the committee held an important hearing on how these wildfires affect our power sector. According to the most recent national climate assessment, the primary cause of power outages in the U.S. is extreme weather, wildfires, hurricanes, intense cold periods, and many of these events are expected to become more intense and frequent due to changes in our climate. The Texas energy market has received a lot of praise for its deregulation, the simplicity of its reliance on price signals and competition to provide power cost effectively. But those market mechanisms never accounted for the possibility that the pipelines would freeze. And it's pretty clear that market incentives didn't generate the investment needed to provide the necessary resiliency. Mr. Rob, you indicated in response to Mr. Tonko's questions that you agree that there's a need for government to impose basic standards for resiliency on the electric and gas providers since the market forces themselves don't induce it. Um, can you tell us what actions utilities and regional transmission organizations need to take to address climate change? Can you flesh that out a little bit for us?
Well, I sorry. Yeah, I guess I would say the main thing from a grid operations perspective is to have a very broad view as to the range of climate scenarios that you have to be prepared to serve. Whether that's extreme hot weather in the summer, extreme cold weather in the winter, making sure that you have the resources lined up to be able to serve your customers during that period of time. That would be the main thing I would focus on.
And any specific one or two things that Texas should have done in advance of a cold weather snap?
Well, I think the weatherization that we've talked about, both of the entire fleet of resources, because every resource had issues. Even the coal plants had issues with frozen coal piles. So coal is not the only way out of this box. What I'm very concerned about, though, is the fuel side of this equation. One of the things that I think we've come to learn is that resources, as we've thought about them traditionally, we think about capacity being required. We haven't spent as much time thinking about the fuel behind them and the energy that they can produce. I think one of the things that the grid operators need to start shifting their operating paradigm to is starting to think about, seasonal energy planning and operating planning that takes into account fuel variability and fuel availability as well.
And it's pretty clear to me that leaving that to the market alone isn't going to generate the incentive to do those investments. That's got to come from some industry and government consensus, correct?
Uh,
Regulation.
I would leave it to market design experts to decide whether the markets could incent that kind of planning on their own.
Well, it's been 10 years and the market hasn't done it, despite knowing that this was coming. Let me turn to Mayor Turner. The severe storm in Texas can't be classified as once in a century, and you've led Houston through multiple major storms, including Hurricane Harvey in 2017. In your statement, you say, quote, "The Texas grid must be designed with the full appreciation that the climate change is real and extreme weather events can occur throughout the year." Mayor, what investments do you see that are necessary to improve Texas grid resiliency in the face of a changing climate? And when we think about investing in grid resiliency more broadly, are there lessons all of us can learn from Texas?
And when I was in the Texas House back in 2011, what I said to the Public Utility Commission and to ERCOT and to our state leaders is that if Texas was going to hold on to its closed grid, then we had to make sure that we had an adequate reserve, an adequate power to meet these extreme weather events. I agree with you. Over the last 10 years, Texas simply relied on market incentives. There were no mandates. The hope was that the market incentives would incentivize the power generators to weatherize their system. At this point, the mandate must come in place. The system has to be weatherized. And then we have to make sure to do everything we can to build in as much redundancy throughout our power generators all the way to the end users. And that's what we're doing even on the local level. We have to make sure that we build in redundancy at the local end as well as from the state end.
And I agree, Mayor. I want to say I think that the Texas market. I like the way that markets. I understand that markets allocate resources in an efficient way, and I think it's terrific that Texas has employed that power. But it's only as far as it goes, and it hasn't built in the need to do this resiliency investment, and
And
that's
can I
something that's
say,
got to come from the government. Sure, Mr. Go ahead, real
one,
quick.
and one other thing is that the hope was through this market incentive, the power generators would do it, but they're not going to produce power that people are not going to pay for. They're not going to
Right.
do, and that was the hope, and it did not happen.
Right. I agree. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.